For more great retail real estate content, like, share, and subscribe.
Understanding the build-out process is essential to knowing whether a retail space is going to work with your budget, and it's also critical to negotiating the terms of your lease. There are two primary questions when you're looking at a space from a build-out perspective. One, what are your goals for the final space? And two, what is the current state of the space? From this point, you can determine what needs to happen to get the space where you need it. There's a big range here. Going into a cold, dark shell is very different from going into a second-generation space, but remember that looks can be deceiving, and what may seem like less to do doesn't always mean less money or less work. You can learn more about the most common states of leasable spaces in the search video. So, what can you do before you even consider a space? The answer is you get a firm grip on the operations flow and needs of your particular business. One of the first steps to understanding your space requirements is to do a simple exercise in identifying all the functional areas you need and their required adjacencies. What needs to be next to what? For example, if you're planning a cafe with reusable dishes and flatware, you'll need a dishwashing area in the back of the house, and you'll want it to be near a rear door so that you're not rolling a giant bin of trash through your dining room. Or another example, if you're planning a clothing boutique with an e-commerce component, you'll want to make sure you include space for receiving, holding back stock inventory, packing, and shipping. All of this seems obvious, but going through the exercise is a great way to ensure that you're not forgetting anything. And it's a super helpful list to hand off to your architect or space designer that you end up working with. We'll talk more on that later. Before we move on, I want to raise a quick point. Federal ADA guidelines and some local jurisdictions have lots of rules about what is required in public spaces, especially in food service establishments. So your own space plans will be dictated to some extent by these requirements. It's definitely worth spending some time on the internet and talking with your broker about what is required. Now that you know what you have to have in your space, you can start to understand the cost of getting what you need and want. Going back just a minute, remember that the space you're leasing is going to be in one condition when you see it, and the goal is to turn it into your own space as efficiently as possible. Typically, the cost of doing this is shared to varying degrees with your landlord, and this is what you'll work out with your broker during the LOI and lease process. This sharing of costs is achieved in two ways, through work that the landlord does and pays for, or work that they give you money for, called a tenant improvement allowance, or TI. The work that the landlord does will be enumerated in a work letter that's typically negotiated early on in the LOI stage, since it is part of the overall financial package of your deal. One thing to note here, commercial landlords are not in the charity business. So in most cases, any money they give you in TI is going to be amortized over the life of your lease. So it's kind of like financing part of your build out. They'll also likely tell you what the money can and cannot be used for, when they will give you the money, what kind of receipts and documentation they're going to want to see before they hand over a big check. Once you know how much cash you're willing and able to spend on building out your space, you'll need to merge that reality with your vision for the space. One quick point to make about the design and budget dance. In the process, you will likely see some ugly prices, and you may need to revise or even scrap some elements of your design. This is really normal. The process of going back and making these revisions is called value engineering, or VE. And it's an important part of the process. If your gorgeous custom cabinetry is going to cost you $80,000, is that a good investment? The answer may be yes, or it may be no. But you need to assess certain costly elements against the realistic expectations of your customer base. For example, the lighting and decor of fitting rooms of a boutique that sells $800 sweaters probably needs to be different from a boutique that sells $80 sweaters. Same concept for whatever you're selling. The VE process will typically require your architect and possibly your engineers to revise their drawings. But hopefully, because you worked hand in hand with your designer and architect to be mindful of your budget, you won't have too many major changes.